Welcome to the Politics of Everything. I'm Amber Daines, your host and podcast producer. This is a half hour of power, a podcast dropping every week where I unpack the politics of everything, from money to motherhood, nutrition to narcissism, startups to secularism, the environment, equality, and much, much more. Our guests are seasoned in the field or topic of their choice, even if you've not heard of them yet. This is a non-partisan show. So while I love exploring varied views and get a buzz from a healthy debate of ideas, this is not a purely blue, white, green program. Please subscribe, tune in and enjoy the politics of everything. The famous saying goes, if only you could put an old head on young shoulders. And when I was a teen and my dad said this, it seemed like a really positive validation that getting older was a milestone to be celebrated and revered even. However, Western society today is very youth obsessed, from stories of billionaires in their 20s and 30s being all the big news, to the brutal reality women over 40 struggle to be counted by anyone other than marketers for beauty products and anti-aging diets, peddled often by far younger social media celebrities and influencers. Looking younger for even a career to last seems to be the goal, which is sometimes jarring and sexist. As a leading expert on gendered ageism, Bonnie Marcus equips ambitious professional women over 50 with the tools and strategies they need to overcome ageist assumptions in the workplace and take charge of their careers. She's an author, coach, podcast host, and speaker. Her book, Not Done Yet, empowers women over 50 to regain their confidence and claim workplace power. Starting in an entry-level position, Bonnie worked her way to the C-suite despite the challenges of sexism and ageism, otherwise known as gendered ageism. She witnessed many talented, hardworking women struggling to get ahead and made it her mission to ensure women of any stage in their career know how best to advocate for themselves and understand office politics to advance their careers, especially over 50, because this is where women are most marginalised and they show signs, of course, of visible ageing. As founder of Bonnie Marcus Leadership LLC, a premier leadership and coaching firm today, she empowers women to understand the value they bring to the table and own the power of their age. And so I warmly welcome Bonnie to the Politics of Everything.
Well, thank you. And thank you for that intro.
Podcasting remotely can be challenging, but it doesn't have to be. Since day one of the Politics of Everything, I have relied on Zencastr's all-in-one solution to make the process quick and painless, the way it should be for those of us who just love great content and want to get our ideas out into the world. If you know me, I'm obsessed with quality in terms of my guests, my sound, and everything about my show has to be great the first time. I'm time poor. It's so easy to use Zencastr. I'm not tech savvy and you don't need to be either. There's nothing to download. Just click on the link and off we go. Zencastr is all about making your podcasting experience easy, and with everything from local recording to automated post-productions now in their toolkit, you don't have to leave your browser to get that episode done, and done fast. I have a special offer for you, and hopefully you can experience what I have with Zencastr. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my VIP code, the Politics of Everything, all lowercase and one word, to get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. How good is that? I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.
You know, it's always something to hear your career kind of summarized like that. It's like, oh, yeah.
It is, isn't it? Oh, yeah, I've done all this stuff. And that's the great thing, I guess, about getting older, that we've got experience and there's lots of things to talk about. But I'd love to ask you my starting question for all my guests. What did you think you wanted to be as a young Bonnie? And what was your early career like? I obviously know that you reached the C-suite level and what you do today, but what sort of preceded that?
Well, I mean, if we're going way back, I wanted to be a ballerina. And I was fortunate enough to have my parents indulge me in ballet lessons a few times a week. But at some point, I think it was around puberty, I was told I would never make it because I didn't have the right body to be a ballerina. And
that's fairly brutal, isn't it, when they tell you that stuff?
It's like, whoa, okay. And of course, at the time, you know, the whole idea of a ballerina was a Russian prima ballerina who was tall and slender, long legs. You know, I think that has changed since then, but it certainly put a damper on that career. And as far as my early career, I like to say that I got into business really by accident. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, even in college. I was pre-med for a while. Then I switched to sociology. Then I graduated and my parents asked, like, what are you going to do now? And I didn't really know. So I went back and I got a master's degree in education. And I was teaching kindergarten. I was teaching kindergarten when I got a divorce and I had 2 young children. And that wasn't going to pay the bills. So I answered an ad in the local newspaper for a 9-to-5 job for a medical secretary for a large physician practice. And I went in and I interviewed and they said, nah, you're overqualified. We're going to train you and you're going to leave. But then, Amber, they called me about 2 weeks later and they said, we're opening up a joint venture with a healthcare management company. And we're opening up a cardiac rehab center with about 30 docs. They're looking for somebody to run the center. Would you like to interview? And of course, I jumped right in, which is pretty much what I've done my whole career, despite the fact I had no qualifications whatsoever to run a center, no business training. But they taught me the business. And in a year and a half, I was not only running that center, but 11 centers up and down the East Coast of the United States. And that was my entrance into business. I really learned business on the job. And
by doing business. So like
doing business, right. And most people say, oh, you were CEO, you must have gone to business school.
Yeah, Wharton or Harvard or all those places. So, well, that's amazing. I love to hear that. Look, the research you've conducted on gendered ageism in the workplace to determine how ageist assumptions affect women, corporations and the economy fascinates me a lot because I'm heading towards the big 5-0 and I'm aware of that sort of, I guess, prejudice, if you like. What have been some of the most surprising findings in your research, perhaps, that we need to challenge and we need to be aware of?
Well, first of all, I surveyed 800 women globally about their experiences with gendered ageism and, what they were witnessing, what they were experiencing. And overall, Amber, 80% of the women experienced it. But what's really interesting is the breakdown by age. Here's what really surprised me. 77% of women under 35 felt the effects of gendered ageism.
That seems far too young. It just seems like that's when your career is really taking flight.
Well, it's true. But they were told they looked too young. They didn't have enough experience to have an opinion, so they weren't valued. They weren't invited to key meetings. Very similar to some of the things that women over 59 say were experiencing. When they were told, they didn't look the part anymore. They were perhaps too old. And their wisdom and experience wasn't valued anymore. But so that was really interesting. The other thing that was interesting is as women approach 35, so the group of women from 35 to 40, 60% experienced gendered ageism. And talk about, being at the prime of your career. But really, women at that age, especially if they choose to be a mother, experience the motherhood penalty. And very often they have to take some time off. They fall off the leadership track. They can't get back. They feel a cut in their income, even if they do try to get back. So the motherhood penalty around that age, which is all certainly a part of gendered ageism, was really felt by 60% of the women. And then really no surprise, women 59 to 64, 88% experienced gendered ageism.
Incredible. Well, it's good to have the data behind, I guess, some of these ideas. But what do you think corporations can do to create a more diverse and equitable workforce? And I guess work with women particularly to empower them to achieve their career goals without that bias of age holding them back. And that probably includes like you said in the survey, younger women who I do recall, I'm now remembering this, 25 years ago when I started my career in journalism, I do remember the editors looking at me and thinking I was too young to do serious news
Right.
stories. Like, the male cadet journalist would get the politics and business stories and they go, Amber, would you like to do something about charity? And like, it's just that
Or
sort of inherent bias. Yeah, like beauty, no, thank you. But, and then you kind of, what's the sweet spot then? And I think that's going to be the challenge, right? Like, how do you make it sure that we're not, just keep going with what's kind of been the biases all the way through our careers?
Well, I think it's very important to acknowledge that it exists and to educate, because very often there are certainly instances that I've experienced myself where somebody will make kind of an offhand comment about me or my age or somebody else's age, and they don't even realize that it's ageist. Because we don't say anything. We don't acknowledge it. We kind of suffer in silence. And I think it's really important for us to be aware that it's not always malicious, that a lot of people have, in fact, I would say the majority of our society have internalized these ageist beliefs. And they're not being malicious when they make a joke or a comment. It's just a part of their belief system. And we need to acknowledge it and call it out. I think that in the workplace, we definitely need to acknowledge that it exists. And that has a lot to do with education. It has a lot to do with training. It has a lot to do with leadership saying that we acknowledge that this is one of the initiatives that we need to take on in our, diversity, equity, and inclusion. With that in mind, with that kind of intention, then to look under the covers. And this is really important, to look at your hiring and recruitment practices. What are the criteria for promotion? What are the criteria for raises? And look at, the data. Who is getting promoted at what point? Who is getting the raises? How are your hiring practices affecting women across the whole age demographic? And especially with the use of artificial intelligence now, I think that, and the bias that is kind of ingrained in the coding there, that companies really need to take a good hard look at it. Training employees on ageism is really important, and creating a safe environment or a forum for women to be able to discuss their experiences without any kind of repercussions or fear that they're going to lose their jobs. So I think, ongoing training and skills at all levels is really important. One of the other surprising things that I found in my research is that 3/4 of the women who experienced ageism didn't take any action because 70% of them felt it wouldn't do any good. They didn't trust HR. They didn't want to risk losing their jobs. And Amber, here's the other thing, that if they did take action and they spoke with their manager, they were really disappointed because their managers did nothing. And 71% were disappointed with HR. So that really points to the importance of training our managers, training employees at all levels.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. I think it's upsetting when there's no action taken, when you've taken that huge step, which is often probably very intimidating to mention it to HR or to your manager, and nothing really happens, nothing changes. That's kind of going to really demoralize you in many ways.
Right. Yeah. And continue to. And it just perpetuates the silence. So women will say, well, why bother? And they don't speak up. And then corporations say, we don't have a problem. Nobody's complaining about anything. So it's really important to empower women, to give them the voice, to give them the safety that they can speak up. And I liken this to where women were before Me Too, right? Before the Me Too movement, we felt that we didn't have a voice. We felt that, we we would suffer if we spoke up. We'd lose our jobs, we'd lose opportunities. And it wasn't until women started to, one at a time, but started to say, hey, this is happening and speak up, that collectively women really found their voice and made a difference.
So, flipping it the other way, what are some of, I guess, the main or necessary tools in your view that women need to empower themselves in the workplace to ensure that not only are they being heard, but they're actually getting that seat at the table, and that their age and their gender are not seen as pluses, which can be, in some ways, yep, you're young, you're going to do all this stuff, we won't have to pay you as much, or the minuses of, yeah, you don't maybe look as good as you did once, or we just think we can do this cheaper with someone who's younger. Like, how do we make sure that women in some ways take control back? So this is not something like, a victim-based kind of mindset. It's much more, no, I know these things I'm going to offer, and I'm going to be able to really stand strong on that when I go into a workplace. How do we actually equip women to feel that empowerment?
And you nailed it right there. I think women need to understand the value that they bring to the organization and own it. And it's important to really figure out what that value proposition is, how your value proposition benefits the organization, and how your work and the way you are able to achieve results, positive results, can help that organization move forward. And that's really important because you want to position yourself as a valuable contributor in the future, going forward, and not just based on your past resume. So understanding that value proposition is very, very important. Another thing that I coach women is to really declare your ambition. Sit down with your manager and talk about, what your contribution can be going forward, how they see you in, contributing in the future, and create a plan around it. Because a lot of managers, and this is a big assumption, will think, okay, she's approaching 50, 55. She wants to cut back. She doesn't really want to work too much longer. And when you put your stake in the ground and you say, no, I'm very much invested in my career, I'm very much committed to continue to do my best work going forward, then you're kind of, debunking that myth that you're on the way out. So, those are the kinds of things where you take charge, you take control of the narrative, and you position yourself as somebody who has a lot to offer.
Absolutely. No, I love that advice. And obviously that's some of the things that you've been able to do with the women and for yourself that that you've worked through over the years. So what about this challenging idea that I guess some roles and jobs are better suited to younger workers? So I'm thinking my early career, when I moved out of journalism into public relations, I did a lot of corporate event management, and that's quite a long day's physical, job in some ways. You are going from venue to venue, you're overseeing guests, you're like running around a lot. Is it fair to expect that our ability to work as we did is not going to change over time? And I think this is a question maybe not just for women, but for men as well. Like I think of men who are in sort of trade work, for example. I know, often there are aches and pains, you get knee problems, all those things. And cognitively, there might be some changes as well as you get older. Like, how do you actually be honest about where you're really at?
Well, obviously, we can't possibly expect to do the same type of physical labor and demanding jobs that we might do at the beginning of our career. I really believe that it's important for a woman and her manager, the organization, to sit down really at the beginning of their career and chart out what a career path looks like, right? Over time. And it can be certainly amended at any point in time. But if you're interested in management, you're interested in leadership, what can that organization do to support you, to give that training? But also with the understanding that that job is going to change over time, and what will that look like realistically? Maybe at some point, say you're in consulting work, you don't want to be on a plane every single week. Well, what else? How else can you contribute? So not necessarily leaving it to chance, but having a plan. And this is especially important for women who may want to cut back or opt out if they are taking care of their parents or their children, because then they can come back and assume and jump right back on that track without a tremendous loss in status or perhaps income. Having that in the background, having that career path is that your organization, your manager, and you buy into, I think is important.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to ask you also about menopause, because that's something obviously that affects just women. And there's been more conversations, I know, certainly in Australia in workplaces, to talk about things like menopause leave or being able to raise it as something that is affecting, it can affect your sleep, your hormones affect a lot of things in your life. How can we navigate this particular topic without it being a stigma? I mean, I've seen some research which shows that almost a quarter of women have considered quitting their job due to the impact of menopause or their symptoms at work. And 1 in 10 are actively planning to quit because they just are feeling not as on top of things or not as well as they once did. But certainly this is only a phase of their life, and we're probably going to lose out on some great talent if that actually becomes a reality. What's your view on how we deal with this?
Well, I think that it really is losing its stigma because more women are speaking out about it. And I remember, when I was going through menopause in the workplace, you never talked about it, right? You just kind of sucked it up. And if you didn't feel well one day, then, so be it. Now, the conversation is coming to the forefront. And you're talking about research that's been done about this and how women feel about this and what's happening, the pressure they're feeling in the workplace. So I think it's progress that this is coming to the forefront. And a lot of companies, well, not a lot, but there are companies who are developing policies around this. And certainly it's important to educate and to have training about it too, so that your managers will understand if you need to take some time off, because you're not feeling well or you're not feeling up to it. So I think that we're seeing a forward movement. Certainly a lot more can be done. And I have read that some companies are addressing this.
And I think it's a good thing. I suppose in some ways it's kind of like enforcing your age as well. Like I know women can go into early menopause, for example, but I know it's more my mother's era than me that didn't talk about it, but also my mum's always been a bit strange about her age. Like I know how old she is now, but I don't really know when I was growing up if she was 40 or 45. Age was kind of this sort of, penalty, if you like. So I think that's, for me, the biggest challenge. It's you're no longer of reproductive age, and there's a lot of stigma around that as well, and that links into, I guess, that
I
the
agree.
Physicality of aging.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think a lot of it rests with us. It's such a milestone in our lives that we may or may not be prepared to really absorb the fact that, okay, we're not child-rearing age anymore. And we have passed through this milestone. And does that mean now we're old? Does that mean, we should be put out to pasture? No. And women are definitely fighting back about that, because the more we normalize it, Amber, because all women go through this at some point, the better off we'll all be.
Yeah, absolutely. Just changing tack a little bit. At the moment, what's some of your most favorite business tool? Can't be a smartphone, because I think everyone has one of those and loves it. But, what's something that you found in your business has been really helpful in terms of an app or maybe some sort of other technology? And what do you love about it at the moment? What's kind of that thing that's kind of making your life easier?
I'll probably use, many of the business tools that most entrepreneurs use, but I think there's one that comes to mind immediately, and that's Canva. So it just helps me to create graphics, to put up videos, to be able to have more of an interesting presence in social media. I especially use it on my Instagram account. And without it, I wouldn't know the first thing about how to do it.
Yeah, it's really democratized, I guess, some of those visual kind of tools which you would have paid a designer to do every single time. And like you say,
Exactly.
the
So you become your
proliferation of
own,
content that you need.
you become
Yeah.
your own designer, and it's empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Bonnie, what would you say has been your biggest life lesson to date, and why has it been so important?
I think the biggest life lesson, when I look back on my life and career, is not to play small and to really own who I am and own the power of not only my age, but all of my experiences, and be really open to new opportunities and not to hold myself back, not to hold myself back because of some limiting beliefs I may have, but be open to trying new things and stepping into my personal power. Whenever I've done that, it has led to success.
Great advice for everyone. So how do you define your version of success these days? I think sometimes when we're younger, but not always, but for me, I know for me it was about external validation, winning awards, getting those promotions. That becomes less important in some ways as you get older. So for you, what has been your sort of, I guess, latest definition of what makes success work for you?
You're right. It really has changed. I think earlier in my career, it was all about the promotions and the financial success. Right now, I would say the most important thing is, and my version of what success is really to feel that I'm making a difference. I would say 5 years ago, I was a trailblazer. I jumped in and said, gendered ageism is an issue. And I put my, stake in the ground before it was really recognized across the board. And now it's just been one of my passions that doing that and talking about it and continuing to bring it forward is making a difference. And I feel that that's my version of success right now.
And just a takeaway message for us on the politics of gendered ageism as we wrap up our conversation today.
That gendered ageism affects women of all ages. And, it's not just something that happens automatically when we turn 50 and beyond. I think that women of all ages at every stage of their career need to understand the effects of gendered ageism, need to be educated on it, need to be not only aware, but also understand how to overcome it and to really not absorb all the internalized ageist beliefs that our society holds, because that's what really takes our power away and keeps us back.
Thank you so much for your time today, Bonnie. If you do want to connect further with Bonnie Marcus, some contact details are on the show notes. Until next time, take care. Thanks so much for listening today. If you've enjoyed the politics of everything, I thrive on your feedback. So please add a short review and share the podcast with your network through Apple, Spotify, and all the usual suspects. I'm always on the hunt for new and diverse guests, so if you or someone you know has a fresh idea you're busting to get out there, please email me at amber@amberdanes.com and my crew will get back to you very soon.